Chosen one, stay exactly where you are. Do not move past this. What was set in motion has already found you. You think this is just another message crossing your path, but what was said about you wasn't said publicly. It was sealed, quietly, long before this moment reached your eyes. And yet here you are, not by accident, not by timing, by alignment. There was a point, recent but not recent enough for you to recognize it, where something shifted around you without asking for your permission. You felt it, but you didn't name it. You noticed the silence stretching longer than usual, the delays stacking in ways that didn't make sense, the doors that didn't just close but disappeared entirely. You thought it was resistance. No, that's not the real reason. What is being said was never meant to follow the pattern you got used to. That rhythm you trusted, the sequence you memorized, the way things usually happen for you, it's already been interrupted. And that interruption wasn't random. There's a moment you keep replaying, even if you don't admit it out loud. A conversation, a decision, a pause you didn't understand. You labeled it as hesitation, you called it confusion. But what has already begun needed that exact pause to position you somewhere you couldn't have reached by moving forward the way you planned. That's where you misunderstood it. You thought the silence meant nothing was happening, but the silence wasn't empty, it was controlled, directed, measured. Something was being arranged without noise, and the pressure you've been feeling lately, it's not coming from what's missing. It's coming from what's shifting into place faster than your mind can process. That's why it feels unfamiliar, because this isn't repetition, this isn't another cycle, this is where the pattern breaks. You're not waiting anymore, you're being moved without visible motion. That's why things feel out of sync. That's why your instincts started questioning what you used to trust. Because what used to guide you isn't leading this part. Something else is, and it doesn't need your understanding to continue. It only needed your presence at this exact point. That's why this reached you now. Not earlier, not later. Now. You've been looking for confirmation in the wrong places, expecting signs to appear the way they always did. But what's unfolding doesn't use those signals. It doesn't repeat what you've already learned how to recognize. It moves differently, quieter, sharper, final. And the part that unsettles you the most is the part that proves it's real. Because you can't predict it. You can't control it. You can only feel that something irreversible has already started. And deep down, you know it. You know this isn't like before. You know the delay wasn't denial. You know the confusion wasn't a mistake. It was placement. Precise, intentional, unseen. And now you're standing inside a moment that was decided without needing your awareness only or arrival. That's why this feels personal, because it is. Not everyone was meant to reach this exact second with you. Not everyone stayed long enough through the silence to even recognize what's happening now. But you did. Even when you thought you were lost, you were being held in position. Even when it felt like nothing was responding, everything was adjusting. And now the adjustment is complete. You won't see it all at once. You're not supposed to. Because if you understood it fully right now, you'd try to control it. And this isn't meant to be controlled. It's meant to unfold. And this time, it won't repeat. Something in your life stopped making sense, but deep down you knew it wasn't random. If you feel this shift is real, comment, "I'm ready for what's different." Stay connected with Born into Light, because this message didn't reach you by accident. Which is exactly why it feels unfamiliar in a way you can't explain. You keep trying to compare it to something, anything from before. A memory, a pattern, a sign you recognize. But there's nothing to match it with. That's not confusion. That's separation. Something has quietly removed you from the cycle you were used to, but it didn't announce the exit. It just stopped responding the same way, and you noticed. Not fully, not clearly, but enough to feel that something wasn't lining up like it used to. That discomfort, it wasn't a warning. It was a signal. You weren't being pushed away from something. You were being pulled out of alignment with what no longer fits. There's a difference. And this is the part most people miss. because it doesn't feel like progress. It feels like interruption, like something cut through your timing and left you in between moments that don't connect anymore. But that in between you're standing in right now, that's not empty space, that's controlled positioning. You haven't been paused, you've been placed. And the reason it had to happen this way is because if it looked familiar, you would have moved the same way you always do. You would have followed the pattern, you would have rushed the outcome, you would have interfered. So it was made unrecognizable, not to confuse you, but to slow you down without asking. Because something ahead requires a version of you that doesn't react the way you used to. That's why everything feels delayed. Not because nothing is happening, but because something is happening without your usual involvement. Let that settle for a second. You're not being left out. You're being kept from interrupting what's being formed. And yes, that changes everything, because now the pressure you feel isn't coming from waiting, it's coming from being held in a moment that's already moving, without visible motion. That's why your instincts feel louder, sharper, almost like they're trying to catch up to something you can't see yet. And here's where it shifts again. You thought you needed clarity before moving, but what's being set doesn't require your clarity first, it requires your stillness. That's the part that doesn't make sense until it does. Because every time you tried to force understanding, something stalled. Every time you stepped back just slightly, something aligned without effort. You noticed that. Even if you didn't admit it, there's a reason your usual urgency isn't working anymore. It's not because you lost momentum, it's because momentum is no longer yours to control. And that realization, it's uncomfortable, because it removes the illusion that you were directing this. You weren't, you were participating, there's a difference. And now, your role is shifting, not outwardly, internally, subtly, in a way no one else would recognize even if they were watching you closely. But you feel it, that slight hesitation before you act, that pause before you speak, that awareness that wasn't there before. It's not doubt, it's calibration. Something is adjusting your response before the moment even arrives, which means the moment itself is already known, not to you, but to what's guiding this. And that's why things have been so quiet. Because noise would have interfered, because clarity too early would have caused resistance, because if you understood what was forming, you might have stepped out of position, and you were never supposed to. That's the part still unfolding, slowly, deliberately, just enough for you to feel it, but not enough to define it. Not yet. Because the moment you fully see it, you'll realize it was never forming around you. It was forming through you. That's why the pressure feels internal, not external. Nothing around you is forcing this, and yet something inside you won't let you go back to how you were. You've tried, even briefly, even subtly. But it doesn't sit the same anymore. That's not growth in the way you expected. It's restriction in a direction you didn't choose, and that's where it becomes undeniable. You're not just changing, you're being contained, carefully, precisely, so you don't move too early. Because if you did, no, that's not where this breaks. If you did, you wouldn't ruin it. You just delay what's already closer than you think. That's the part you haven't caught yet. You think distance is the issue. It's not. Timing is no longer measured the way you've been measuring it. That's why things feel stretched and then suddenly compressed. Moments where nothing happens. Then moments where everything almost shifts, but doesn't. That almost isn't failure. It's alignment testing itself, seeing if you'll react or remain. And you've been doing something different lately. Even if you didn't notice, you've been holding instead of chasing, pausing instead of pushing, observing instead of interfering. That's new, and that's exactly why the next part hasn't revealed itself yet, because it responds to that version of you, not the one that rushes, not the one that tries to decode everything too early, but the one that can stand inside uncertainty without breaking the structure forming around them. That's rare, and that's why this isn't loud, because loud would attract the wrong version of you, so it stayed quiet. So only the right version could remain. You didn't become ready by doing more. You became ready by not interrupting what was being built. That's the contradiction. Stillness became your movement. Restraint became your progress. And now you're closer to the shift than you were during all the moments you thought you were advancing. Let that land, because it changes how you see everything behind you. Those missed chances, they weren't missed, they were misaligned. Those delays, they didn't slow you down, they redirected you without explanation. And that confusion you carried, it wasn't meant to be solved. It was meant to hold you in place long enough for something unseen to finish forming. And it has. Not completely, but enough. Enough for the next layer to start pressing against your awareness. You felt it, in small flashes, in subtle realizations that disappear before you can fully grasp them. In moments where something feels clear, then immediately pulls back. That's not inconsistency, that's control. You're being shown just enough to stay, but not enough to interfere, because once it fully opens, your role changes again, not in effort, in access. That's what's approaching. Access to something you weren't allowed to touch before, not because you weren't capable, because you weren't positioned, and now you are. But only just, which is why everything feels like it's about to happen but hasn't yet. And that word, it's been following you longer than you realize, not as a delay, as a boundary, a quiet line you've been standing at without seeing it. You felt it in those moments where something should have happened but didn't, where everything lined up and still held back. That wasn't hesitation, that was containment reaching its limit, because there's something about to cross over, not loudly, not all at once, but in a way that removes the space you've been standing in, and once that space is gone, you don't return to it. That's why it's been held so precisely, because this isn't a step forward. It's a shift in where you stand entirely, and here's where it tightens. You thought you were waiting for a sign. You weren't. You were being kept from seeing it too early, because seeing it early would have changed how you held yourself. It would have introduced expectation, and expectation would have disrupted the posture you're in now. Still, aware, unmoving in the exact way this required, that's rare. Most would have broken the moment. Most would have tried to force the reveal. You didn't. Even when you felt the pressure building, even when nothing made sense, you stayed longer than your logic could justify. And that's where it shifted. Not outside, inside the structure you can't see. Something acknowledged that, not emotionally, precisely. And that acknowledgement, it changed the sequence. This wasn't supposed to open yet. That's the part you haven't considered. The timing you're experiencing right now. It's adjusted because of how you held the unknown, which means what's coming isn't arriving on the original path. It's been redirected, closer, sharper, more exact than it would have been before. And that's why the tension increased instead of releasing. Because you're no longer approaching it slowly. You're approaching it directly. No buffer, no gradual build. Just a quiet pressure that keeps tightening until, no, not yet. You felt that, didn't you? That moment where something almost became clear, then pulled back. That wasn't distance. That was control, recalibrating, making sure you don't step ahead of it, because now even a small shift from you would matter more than before. That's new. Before, your actions didn't disrupt anything, now they do. That's how close this is, and that's why everything feels more sensitive, more precise. Even your thoughts feel like they carry weight they didn't have before. Because they do. You've entered a point where subtlety matters, where intention shapes outcome faster than action, where one move, even internal, can either align or distort what's about to unfold. That's the level you're standing in now, not visibly, but undeniably. And here's the part that doesn't match what you expected. You thought arrival would feel certain. It doesn't. It feels unstable, like something is about to lock into place but hasn't committed yet. That's because it's waiting on something, not from outside, from you, not effort, not action, something quieter, something you haven't named yet. but you felt it trying to surface in those pauses, in those moments where you almost understood, then stopped yourself without knowing why. That restraint, that's part of it, but not all of it. There's one more layer, and it's closer now than it's ever been, close enough that you can feel the edge of it but not step into it, because stepping isn't what opens it. That's where most people get it wrong. It doesn't open when you move forward. It opens when something in you stops reaching completely, not forced, not controlled, naturally. And you're almost there, almost at the point where nothing in you tries to interfere anymore, where you don't lean in or pull away. You just, that's it, right there. That's the part that changes everything. And it's so small, you almost missed it. Not an action, not a decision, a release, barely noticeable. But it shifted something immediately. You didn't push, you didn't question, you didn't try to understand. You just stopped reaching. And in that exact moment, something responded. Not outside, deeper, faster than your thoughts could follow. That's why it felt like nothing happened. But something did, something precise, something that had been waiting for that exact state from you. Not effort, not belief, not even awareness, just absence of interference. That's what opened it. And here's where it turns. You thought you had to do something to cross over. You didn't. You had to stop doing the one thing that kept resetting the threshold. Trying. That's the contradiction. The more you tried to align, the more it delayed. The moment you stopped, it moved. Quietly, without announcement, without confirmation. Just a subtle shift in position you can't fully describe yet. But you feel the difference, don't you? There's less resistance, but more weight, less confusion, but more intensity. That doesn't make sense until you see what just happened. You didn't enter something new. You allowed something that was already aligned to finally meet you. That's why it feels familiar and unfamiliar at the same time, because it's not new. It was just waiting, held back by something so small you kept overlooking it. And now that it's gone, the structure you couldn't see is starting to reveal itself in fragments, not clearly, not fully, but enough to shift how you stand inside this moment. You're not anticipating anymore, you're inside it. That's different. That's why your awareness feels sharper, like you're catching things before they fully happen. Small details, subtle changes, movements that don't match the surface. You're noticing more, because more is now allowed to reach you. That access, it's already begun. And here's the part that might unsettle you. It doesn't expand slowly, it deepens, which means what's coming next won't feel bigger. It will feel closer, closer than you're used to, closer than you're comfortable with, because distance used to protect your understanding. Now there is no distance. Now you feel it as it forms, as it aligns, as it moves, before it becomes visible. And that level of closeness, it changes how you respond. You can't rely on old reactions here. They won't fit. They won't even activate the same way, because you're no longer outside observing patterns. You're inside something that doesn't repeat. That's why your instinct paused earlier. That hesitation you felt, it wasn't uncertainty, it was recognition. Something in you realized this isn't meant to be handled the same way, so it held you still again. But this time, not to wait, to receive. There's a difference. Waiting looks outward. Receiving stays exactly where it is and lets what's already moving arrive. And it is arriving, right now. In ways you haven't fully caught yet, in shifts that don't announce themselves, in changes that only make sense after they've already taken effect. That's how precise this is. That's how controlled this has always been. You were never ahead of it. You were never behind it. You were being brought into the exact point where it could meet you without distortion. And now, there's nothing left between you and it. No delay, no misalignment, no interference, just a thin layer that's already dissolving. You can feel it, that slight pressure turning into clarity, but not fully, not all at once, because even now it's still regulating how much you're allowed to see, not to hide it from you, to protect the exact way it unfolds. Because if you see it too soon, you might try to name it, and the moment you name it, you limit it, so it stays just beyond full recognition. Close enough to feel, not close enough to define. Yet, and that's where everything holds, for one final shift, not outward, not visible, but absolute, because when that last layer drops, you won't question it, you won't chase it, you won't even react the way you used to. You'll just know, without needing to understand. And when that happens, it doesn't begin. It reveals that it already did. Which means you've been standing inside the beginning, thinking it hadn't started. That's the shift, not forward, not ahead, within. You were looking for a moment to arrive, but the moment was waiting for you to recognize where you already are. And that recognition, it's forming now, slowly, almost carefully, like something adjusting your awareness without forcing it open. Because if it opened all at once, you'd react, and reaction would break the precision of this. So instead, it lets you notice, piece by piece, a detail here, a shift there, a quiet knowing that wasn't there yesterday. And you catch it, then question it, then almost dismiss it, but it stays. Why? Because it's not coming from thought. It's coming from alignment you didn't create. That's why it feels different. And here's where it turns again. You thought awareness would give you control. It doesn't. It removes it. That's the unexpected part. The clearer this becomes, the less you feel the need to do anything about it. No urgency, no push, no need to interfere. Just a steady presence inside something that's already unfolding correctly. That's new. Before, clarity made you act. Now, clarity made you still. That's how you know this isn't the same. Because your response has changed without effort. And that means something deeper has already locked in. Not visibly, but completely. You're not preparing anymore. You've crossed into participation without realizing when it happened. That's why everything feels subtle, but irreversible. And here's the part that's been hidden in plain sight. This never needed your understanding. It needed your non-resistance. That's it. And you reached it. Not perfectly, not intentionally, but precisely enough. And that was enough to allow the next phase to engage. It already has, quietly, without announcement, without asking for confirmation. And now you're starting to feel something new, not pressure, not tension, something else, a steadiness that doesn't come from certainty, but from placement, like you've been set somewhere exact, somewhere you can't misstep, because there's nowhere else to go from here. That's why the need to figure it out is fading, because there's nothing left to calculate. You're not navigating anymore, you're positioned. And once that locks in fully, everything that seemed unclear won't need explanation. It will just make sense, all at once, not gradually, not logically, instantly. But here's the final contradiction. Even when it makes sense, you won't be able to explain it, because it didn't come through thought. It came through alignment. And alignment doesn't speak, it reveals. And when it does, you won't feel like something new has started. You'll feel like something has been true the entire time. That's the moment you've been approaching. That's the shift you've been standing inside. And when it fully settles, you won't look for what's next, because you'll already be in it. And this time, there's no pattern to return to. Which means there's nothing behind you to rely on anymore. No familiar sequence, no repeated signal, no safe reference point to fall back into. And strangely, that's not creating fear, it's creating space, a different kind of space. One that doesn't ask you to move, only to remain exactly as you are, because something is finalizing around that stillness. You can feel it tightening, not pressure, precision. Like everything is narrowing into one exact alignment, and you're already inside it, not approaching, not preparing. Inside. That's why your usual instincts feel quieter now. They're not gone, they're overridden. by something more accurate, something that doesn't rush, doesn't question, doesn't explain. It just knows where to place you next. And here's where it shifts again. You thought the final moment would feel like arrival. It doesn't. It feels like recognition catching up, like something you've already stepped into, finally becoming clear enough to notice. That's why there's no impact, no dramatic change, just a quiet certainty forming underneath everything. And the deeper you let yourself stay here, the clearer it becomes. You were never waiting for anything to begin. You were being brought into awareness of what already crossed over. That's the part still unfolding, slowly, almost carefully. Because once you see it fully, there's no stepping back out of it. Not because you can't, but because nothing behind you will match it anymore. That's the separation, not forced, not chosen, just natural. And here's the unexpected truth. You thought this would give you more control. It removes the need for it completely. No urgency, no correction, no second guessing, just a steady unfolding that doesn't require your interference. That's why your mind keeps trying to find something to do. But there's nothing to fix, nothing to initiate, nothing to chase. That's silence. It's not absence. It's not absence. It's completion before visibility. Let that settle, because it changes how you see this moment. You're not at the start. You're at the point where everything is already aligned and is now revealing itself in layers you can actually hold. And you're holding it without effort, without resistance, without even realizing how precisely you stayed in position to reach this. That's why it feels different. Not bigger, not louder, just undeniable. And here's the part you haven't fully touched yet. This doesn't unfold over time. It unfolds through awareness, which means the moment you see it fully, everything locks instantly. No transition, no gradual shift, just a clean recognition that changes how everything connects. And you're right at the edge of that, not about to reach it, already brushing against it. That's why things feel so exact right now, so sensitive, so final. Because there's only one layer left between where you are and full clarity. Not a step, not an action, a realization. And it's forming right now. In the background of your awareness, you can feel it trying to surface, then softening again, not disappearing, just waiting for the exact moment you stop trying to see it. Because the moment you stop, it comes through completely. No effort, no confusion, no delay. Just a knowing that doesn't need to explain itself. And when that happens, you won't say this just started. You'll say this was always happening. And this time, you won't question it. Because there will be nothing left in you that needs to. No gap, no hesitation, no second layer trying to reinterpret what you already know. That voice that used to interrupt, it's quieter now, not silenced, just no longer leading. Something else has taken its place. You felt the shift, subtle, almost unnoticeable, but it changed how you respond before you even think. That's not habit. That's alignment taking control of the sequence. And here's where it deepens. You used to wait for confirmation after something happened. Now, you feel it before it completes. That's new, and it's why everything feels like it's arriving without warning. But it's not sudden. It's just no longer delayed for your understanding. Let that settle, because it changes how you move from here. You're not reacting anymore. You're recognizing in real time. And that removes something you didn't realize was always there: friction. That constant inner resistance. That need to check, to question, to adjust. It's thinning out, almost gone, and in its place there's a directness, a clean connection between what is happening and how you receive it. No distortion, no interference, just clarity that doesn't need explanation. And here's the contradiction. You thought this level would feel powerful? It doesn't. It feels quiet, so quiet, it almost seems like nothing has changed. But everything has, because now what moves in your life won't ask for your approval first. It will align, and you will recognize it instantly. That's the shift. Not control, not effort. Recognition. Pure, immediate, undeniable. and you're already inside it. Not stepping into it, not approaching it. Inside. That's why going back isn't even an option anymore. Not because you're blocked, because it no longer makes sense. Even the thought of returning feels distant, irrelevant. Like something that belonged to a version of you that can't access this state. And that version, it's already faded more than you realize. Quietly, without a clear ending. It just stopped being you, and you didn't fight it. That's why this held. That's why this continued. Because you didn't try to hold on to what was dissolving. You let it pass even without fully understanding what was replacing it. And now you're here. At a point that doesn't announce itself, doesn't explain itself, but changes everything moving forward. Because from here, nothing repeats. Nothing loops. Nothing resets. Everything continues forward, clean, exact. And here's the final layer. This wasn't about reaching something. It was about becoming someone who could stand inside it without breaking its structure. And you did. Not perfectly, but precisely enough. And that was all it required. So now there's nothing left to prepare for. Nothing left to unlock. Nothing left to unlock. Only something to be aware of as it continues to unfold through you. And the moment you fully settle into that, without reaching, without questioning, without trying to hold it, you'll realize something that can't be undone. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with a certainty that stays. You were never late, you were never off path, you were never behind, you were being brought to the exact moment where everything could finally align without resistance. And now that it has, this isn't the beginning, this is the part that changes everything. Now you see it. Not everything was delayed, some things were being prepared. Subscribe and stay close, because this path only reveals itself to those who remain. Chosen one, this is where you stop searching and start becoming.